Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on our podcast, The Passwordless Journey. I'm Ashish Bhatia, and joining me today is Mr. Ashwin Rana, who is someone who has been at the forefront of cybersecurity for more than 20 years now, and has also worked for some cutting-edge startups in the past, like Zscaler, and is now uh, Vice President and Chief Solutions Architect over at Beyond Identity. Hello and welcome, Ashwin. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you, Ashish, for inviting me to this inaugural uh, session.
No, the honor is all mine, Ashwin, and obviously, as the viewers will realize after this podcast is done, that it is truly an honor to listen to you talk about these complex technologies and how you are able to easily simplify them for everybody. So, that being said, let's go ahead and talk about some of the topics that we intend to cover as
So
part of this.
before we get there, though, I would love to see what was your inspiration. How did you decide to start this blog?
Well, Ashwin, so, I have been associated with the telecom industry for the past, I'd say, 16 years or so. I've definitely worked in cybersecurity as part of, working for large scale telecom service providers and also enterprise customers. But identity and access management is a little new to me. And so when I changed course a few months ago and adopted or actually went into this IAM space, quite a lot of my older colleagues and customers actually reached out and they started asking about all the stuff that we were working on because it's all pretty exciting stuff, right? With what the IAM space is going through right now. I thought, I've always wanted to keep things simple and, keep the marketing buzzwords away because, if you look at our LinkedIn feeds, they're filled with all these acronyms and buzzwords that people keep talking about, zero trust, MFA. And I wanted to make something which makes it simpler for anybody who's watching this, right? Because the technologies that we're going to be talking about is going to affect everybody. We're talking about revolutionizing something that is very integral part of our life. We use passwords on a daily basis, whether it's within the realms of the corporate workforce or whether it's in our personal life. So, I thought it'll be a good thing to talk about, and there's so much to discuss, right? So, with that in mind, the focus of this podcast series, is to look at the workforce identity and access management space. Enterprises are definitely looking at modernizing their identity and access management infrastructure, both on the authentication as well as on the authorization side. Device trust is the new name of the game, right? So for those folks who are looking to do that, I want this to be a helpful resource in picking up the right solution, right? In the consumer space, the SIAM space, the consumer identity and access management, some people like me who go to an e-com platform, like your favorite e-com platform, either to do a banking transaction or to go order a pizza, right? We're becoming more familiar with the fact that some of these sites are no longer the way it used to be, right? I mean, we hear about a breach every day, like where your credentials are stolen. So I believe passwordless is going to become a norm in that space also. So I want them to have an understanding of what's coming their way. If you're an app developer who's trying to incorporate passwordless into your app, typically they deal with the platforms like AWS Cognito or Azure B2C or Google Firebase, and they rely on these platforms to handle identity and access management for them. If they want to incorporate passwordless for their users, this might be where they would want to come and look at what is available out there. The other space that is heating up quite a bit is the software supply chain. We are all, anybody who's familiar with the cybersecurity landscape is had heard of the SolarWinds attack in 2020, right? Where the attack actually came in from inside the DevOps org, rather than attack from the outsides that we are familiar to be hearing about, right? So the secure DevOps is an environment. How do you ensure that the code commit and code signing process is actually authenticated? Making sure that at every step of the way there is checks and balances. And then finally, my favorite, which is the network authentication side of it, right? I come from the wireless space. I've worked in Wi-Fi, private wireless networks, private 4G, LTE, cellular, and these are becoming commonplace in the enterprise world. And definitely that's an area where I feel the authentication infrastructure also needs to be upgraded. I see a picture of a dinosaur in your Zoom background with passwords in it, right? And it's a metaphor to what we're trying to do here, right? We're trying to kind of get away. Passwords are, the thing of the past. We want to make it things of the thing of a past, and that's why we take this journey to passwordless. So yeah, so sorry to kind of elaborate on this small question that you asked, but there's quite a lot that I wanted to do as part of this podcast.
And every single topic you mentioned probably deserves a podcast by itself, or maybe multiple of those as you go
Correct.
deeper and deeper. Let's see how far we can go today, how much we can scratch the surface.
Yeah, I want to start off, Ashwin, with the basics today, fundamentals, right? And in that spirit, I want to start off by looking at the lay of the land. What is the current state of authentication in general? If we're talking about the workforce identity and access management, if you can kind of give our viewers an explanation of how an enterprise today, what are the mechanisms that are used by the enterprise today, that would be very helpful.
It's a very good question. So I would say that at this stage, most of the enterprises we do come across are using some kind of secure single sign-on solution. However, they are logging in, users are logging in using their username and password.
Mm-hmm.
Now, many enterprise, I would say, are in that category where
so SSO. Sorry to bother you, but SSO is someone like Azure AD or Okta or Ping Federate or Ping. They have their different versions, right? Or if you're in the education space, then I believe Shibboleth is very popular. So they are the single sign-on provider where you basically go in and access your applications, enterprise applications.
That is correct. So many of them are, I would say, they are just using login ID and password, so just single factor. Now, password, of course, is very weak. And if you look at the Verizon data breach report, say more than 80% of the breach, you could track it down to credentials theft or credentials, not being complex enough, secure enough. So that's the current stage. Now, I would say there are enterprises who are slowly migrating and adopting multi-factor authentication or MFA. That could be your Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator, Okta Verify, SMS, one-time password. Those would fall into that category.
So this is the one where typically you receive some sort of a code on a separate device, right? And then you take that code and you enter that code. This is becoming very commonplace, especially with Google and Microsoft, I've seen.
That's correct. It is becoming commonplace. However, we have seen in the recent past, even large global systems integrator, they do have the MFA licenses, but they've really not deployed it because it's just too complex for employees to use, manage. So there is a lot of resistance, and rightfully so.
When we talk about, like, even now that you're talking about these authentication schemes, right? Passwords are so prevalent. It's like it's there. You cannot simply avoid it. If we have to look at why passwords, and I hate to use the word suck, but why do passwords suck? What, how would you answer something like that? Like if someone says, hey, okay, you are talking about passwordless, but we're using passwords, very effectively today. So I think I should rephrase it by saying, why do centralized credentials, something like a password, suck, basically?
It's a very, very good point you brought out. So, at high level, you could look at the challenges in two different categories or bucket. One set of challenges come from the security perspective, that most human beings, their passwords are not that complex. It's not large enough because our brain can't remember pretty large passwords, and so they're easy to be guessed or stolen. There are all sorts of attack scenario like password spraying, credential stuffing. They are subject to those attacks. You also have issues with those centralized credentials, as you talked about. Is they are subject to phishing attacks. So even if you have more complex password, but if impersonator is able to send you to a phishing site, then doesn't matter how complex a password, or even if you are using MFA, it will still be subject to those attack. Man in the middle attack, brute force attack, those are the other kind of attacks which you run into from security perspective. And you touched earlier, and our more security sensitive customers bring this topic out all the time, that there is an insider risk as well. With the password, if you have stored them in central place, then someday the backup of that could get stolen, active copy could get stolen, and now it could be in the wrong hands, and then enterprises suffer as a result of that. So that's one category. The second and most important category from the end user's perspective, they don't want to be remembering very large, complex password with uppercase, lowercase numbers, special characters. Nowadays, we've seen enterprises asking for 16 character, 24 characters. It's becoming unsustainable from the end user's perspective. Also, many enterprises use VPN to provide additional security, but that comes at the expense of user experience.
Ashwin, this complex password is a pretty big thing. It's easy to just say, okay, we can implement a complex password strategy within the enterprise, but then what ends up happening is then you end up with employees not remembering these passwords and causing more IT tickets to be generated to reset it in the past, or you would see employees store these passwords on a cliff note somewhere. that has happened, So it's very easy. Something as basic as a password can lead to a simple breach, and all of a sudden, this, depending upon what type of access this user has, the attacker has access to internal resources within the enterprise. It's a pretty big deal. Talking about VPN, Ashwin, this is an added layer of security. How does that circumvent the password issue? Can you kind of elaborate on that? Because I think of VPN as, okay, I'm a remote employee trying to access a resource somewhere in the data center, and I'm trying to make sure that I have, first of all, mutually authenticated to ensure who I am, and then I'm encrypting that session to access a resource. So how does that come, like the password come into play there?
So you bring up a very good point. So VPNs are traditionally used for accessing a private application which is running in your data center or public cloud. That's probably the right use of VPN. You could argue that there are other solutions out there, next generation solution, but at least for private application, I can see that. However, enterprises are using this for SaaS application, like if you want to go to Salesforce, Office 365, Box, Dropbox, Google Suite, even then they are requiring that you connect from the enterprise VPN, and then on Salesforce or all the SaaS application, they would say that allow access from a specific IP address, which is their corporate VPN or firewall IP address. So that's how they are trying to sort of compensate for the weakness introduced by the password. But if the hacker is able to get the password for that user, then they can go through VPN as well, and still get to that price resource, whether it's data in Salesforce or Office 365 or wherever it may be. So it's ineffective, but it also creates lots of frictions on the user's parts. Their experience is really, really bad because now they have to go through VPN to access the SaaS application, and they should not have to do that.
I think that's something that needs to be talked about, right? Because we are hearing this more often from the customers that we are talking to, especially the CISOs, right? If you want to add a layer of security, then it comes at the cost of user experience. And so where do you find that fine balance where you need the frictionless experience for the user, where they don't have to go find another device, enter a code, then go, and for every little thing or every little transaction that they're trying to do, they don't want to be able to do an MFA at that point, so a multi-factor at that point. So I think that is another level of frustration that we keep hearing about from the CISOs. Now, another thing, Ashwin, that has been flooding my LinkedIn feeds ever since I've joined this IAM space is, I guess this became more prevalent after blockchain and all the crypto technologies have come in, is distributed identity service. I keep hearing about it. And maybe if you can elaborate on what true distributed identity service looks like. What is an ideal distributor? Well, first of all, what is a distributed identity service? Right? What is this term? If you can explain, that would be helpful.
Most definitely. So traditionally with password-based authentication, you have a central server or directory which has the hash of your password, right? If you're using password-based authentication, now it's not a question of if, it's just when that centralized storage of password gets stolen. Now the hackers have keys to the kingdom. They are now able to log in as any user in the company. So that's why it's considered bad. Even if hackers didn't get hold of that data directly, sometimes there's a risk with the insiders, rogue employees as well. So that is a challenge with the centralized credentials. Now, when we talk about certificate-based authentication, you could implement it one of the two ways. You could have a centralized certificate authority or root CA,
right,
which then issues the certificate for each device and each user. And the weakness with that approach is now if your private key corresponding to that root CA gets stolen,
right.
now impersonate any employee again. And even for large enterprise with a huge IT staff, it's a big challenge to manage and maintain those certificate, revoke those certificate, install those certificate on every single device that employee has. So those are some of the challenges with that centralized system of identity.
I think that's a good point. I have run into this, and folks who have looked at managing certificate authorities, certificate infrastructure in the background. Certificate revocation becomes a big deal, and now with the influx of devices and enterprises allowing users to bring in more devices, it becomes a little bit more challenging. How do we get that certificate onto this user's device? How do we ensure that they're not able to, more advanced users are not able to just plug that certificate out and put it in another device, and especially with iOS and Android, they have become a little bit more stricter with installing the certificate. They would not allow you to install the certificate on these devices if it's not signed by a CSR that is actually generated from within the device. So there are these complex challenges that are also scalability is a thing. But what was interesting to me is the fact that I used to think certificate-based authentication is probably yes, it is complex, but it is the most secure way to authentication. At least for sure, with this mechanism. Up until I started figuring out that even these private keys are susceptible to be hacked, and we read this all the time. That a private key got hacked, and all of a sudden hackers have access to your your credentials. So, with that in mind, Ashwin, leads me to the next question. If I'm an enterprise and I am looking, and 2022, based on what we are seeing, Gartner's report is out there talking about all the high impact technologies. Passwordless authentication is right there at the top, which is high impact. We know enterprises and CISOs are looking at passwordless solutions, and there's quite a lot out there, right? What should they be looking at in a solution for passwordless, right? What are the ideal things? And this is again a generic question. Uh, and why should they be focusing on the things that we are about to discuss?
That's $1 million question.
That's what I get. That's why I get paid the big bucks and you don't. Even though I work for you. That's the deal I negotiated.
so, so first and foremost, I think what we are looking for is the distributed identity ideal solution. You want to have each employee have their personal certificate authority. And there should not be any central repository of private keys. It's only the public key should be in the cloud or wherever you are authenticating.
You said something which is very new to me. Certificate authority is a central certificate authority. What is this personal certificate authority that you're talking about? Like what is personal CAB? Like you're talking about every device now having a certificate authority? Is that what you're referring to?
That is correct. You could have every device having their own certificate authority, or you as a user, you could start with first device, which has a root CA or personal CA, and then you could add additional devices. But the key difference here is there is nothing stored in a cloud or centralized solution. So if for whatever reason, if it ever gets hacked, enterprises do not lose out on the credentials. That's the fundamental. Also, the solution you're looking for, it should be backing up or actually creating those keys and securing those keys in secure enclave or a trusted platform module. Almost all modern devices have this capability. It's a separate physical chip, which is tamper resistant, and it's available in Windows, Mac, Android, iOS, Linux, all the platform. And so ideal solution, you really want to be generating those keys and storing them in those TPM or secure enclaves so that they never leave the device.
Okay, so that was going to be my follow-up question. Okay, if we are talking about devices storing these private keys, how do we know that the devices are secure compared to locating it centrally in some server, somewhere in a data center? So you're saying that there's this trusted platform module, TPM, or a secure enclave, and every device like an iPhone or a Android device or a Windows device. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, Windows 11 now has a requirement that it would not even install on a machine that does not support a TPM. That's correct, right?
That is correct. Yeah. Now there's more awareness in the market, and with starting with Windows 11, that's been the requirement.
Okay. So you store these keys in this insulated environment in a hardware environment within the device itself. So that kind of secures it. Now, why is this different than storing a password somewhere? Like someone can, if I have a key or a password stored somewhere, what is the difference between storing a password or a key in a TPM versus somewhere else?
It's a very good point you are bringing up.
The point being, someone gets hold of my device. How easy is it for them to get this key?
So that goes further into how do you log into your device? You also want to make sure that logging into the device requires a PIN or a biometrics. So they cannot get into your device. Even if they get into your device, we could be requiring biometrics-based authentication when they're trying to connect to any web application. So yes, they are in possession of the device, but they could still not provide your fingerprint or biometrics. So that's how we could even further provide security and make sure that it becomes useless. Of course, the admin and the end users would have ability to revoke that device the minute they find out. And now, even if they get the device, they can't really go anywhere or do anything.
Okay, I understand. So I think we were talking about what that ideal solution would look like. And enterprises have an SSO already in place, right? And I think at this point, we should draw a delineation between a single sign-on provider versus and third-party identity providers. In some cases, they are both the same. So we can elaborate a little bit on SSO versus IDP.
Well, most definitely. So, you have SSO like Azure AD, ADFS, Okta, Ping, ForgeRock, Shibboleth, Keycloak, many others, right? And all the applications are connected to the single sign-on solution. Many of them are able to provide password-based authentication natively. However, for passwordless authentication, you could do integration with solution like Beyond Identity. And so then Beyond Identity would be responsible for truly authenticating, and in some cases, authorizing the user as well. And so that's how you could delineate. But one of the fundamental requirements, if you are a CIO or director for identity and access management in a company, you want to make sure that whatever solution you pick has to be able to work with your existing SSO solution. So you're looking for a solution which has high degree of integration with a large number of identity and SSO provider essentially. You also want to make sure, like, most enterprises we come across have anywhere between 50 to 100 applications, sometimes more applications configured on SSO. So the solution should not require reconfiguring any of those applications, because it's a big challenge if you have to do that.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Also, whatever solution you decide to deploy has to be standard based. You don't really want to have a proprietary algorithms used for that.
So you're talking about, especially in the context of IAM space, you're talking about things like SAML or OIDC OAuth or TLS, something that has been around for 20 plus years now, right? So those type of X.509 certificates, the same infrastructure that is available or has been there since the beginning of time, and use it in a different way, basically.
That is correct. Yeah, you are looking for and making sure that these are all based on open standard. They've gone through the NIST and all the appropriate standards body and been validated for security. So that's, of course, you want to look for that. You also want to make sure that from the provisioning perspective, the solution is using more modern provisioning method like SCIM, so that you are able to add new employees into the solution automatically. You just enter them in one place in your directory, and IDP should automatically know about it and allow that user to enroll.
So SCIM is this standard mechanism that is used to synchronize between directories. Is that how that works? Or?
You could use it between directory or between applications and directory. But yep, that's the
okay. And it's supposed the standard
cross-domain identity management. SCIM is the protocol which gets used for that.
The more modern way of synchronizing your users, your database into other applications or other directories. And it supports the CRUD operation, like the create, update, and delete operations and those kind of things.
Yeah, the last one is most important one from security perspective. Nowadays, the requirements are the minute, let's say the employee's last day was Friday at 5 p.m. At 5:01, if they try to log in, they should not be able to log in. So that's the size you are looking for. And with SCIM, you are able to do that.
What kind of use cases they want these solutions to support for IAM, Ashwin?
That's a very good point you brought out. So depending upon the use case, you may want to use different authenticator. For the most part, first of all, most enterprises have a mix of Windows, Mac, Android, iOS, and Linux, sometimes Chrome OS. So whatever solution you select, you want to make sure can handle all this different OS platforms. Also, traditionally, you may be more used to seeing a authenticator running on your phone or on your Android or iOS phone, and that's called roaming authenticator. Now, there are pluses and minuses for some use cases where, let's say you're trying to log in, you are visiting your parents' house, and you're trying to log in to your mom's computer to check your work email. And if it's allowed that you could access your work email from unmanaged device, that's fine. In that case, you don't really want to install anything on your mom's computer because you're just checking email one time. So the roaming authenticator makes perfect sense. However, when we speak to the enterprise customers, for like vast majority of the employees, they are doing the official business from the corporate issued device or their personal devices. So in both cases, it is, from a security perspective, having an authenticator running on whichever device you are logging in from makes it highly secure, because now we are able to collect the device security posture and apply the authorization policy based on that, even though you are able to produce and confirm that who you are. So that's one benefit, but the other benefit is from the user experience perspective. So you don't have to pull out your phone, whether it's in your pocket, purse, wherever it may be. We actually come across customers who say that their employees are not allowed to have a phone while they're in office. So for those use cases, platform authenticator makes perfect sense. For SIAM application, where you are ordering a pizza, if you're ordering pizza from your mobile phone, that works perfectly fine. You may have a app from Domino's or Pizza Hut, or fill in the blanks, your favorite pizza vendor, right? And you could have your own identity as part of that app, and you could order that way. However, if you're ordering from your laptop, and in that case, we also have web authenticator. So you don't really, if the vendor from who you are ordering from, if they don't have an app, you could have credentials stored in your browser as well. So that's an option you're looking for. And we do come across some customers who do not allow the use of mobile phone. Also, their employees are working on truly shared device. So when they're logging in, they can't really store the credentials on the device. And because they're not allowed to use the phone, they're not allowed to put credential on the device, then external, keys, security keys like Ubico or Google Titan key, those are a few examples. There are many vendors out there. Using that to store the credential would be an appropriate use case as well. Most enterprise may have some mix of those use cases, and making sure that the solution you are selecting is able to cover all those use cases.
Different use cases, yeah.
Would be
and obviously at the root of it is to somehow see you want to eliminate the passwords, right? That's where it is going towards, right? The shared credentials or centralized credentials, sorry, is not the way to go forward. There has to be a way for these, to these organizations to have users coming from the right devices, managed devices versus unmanaged, but also make sure that the security posture matches and the friction is less. Add any layer of security, but make sure that the user friction is less. So Ashwin, I think we covered a lot of ground today, and I think the final question I have is, we are calling our podcast The Journey to Passwordless, and there's a reason for it, right? Because, even if the organization, when you're a 100 employee organization, doesn't matter whether you're 100 employee or 100,000 employees, you are not going to go passwordless overnight, because you're not going to be able to eliminate passwords. It's going to be a journey. Can you talk a little bit about what that journey, because you've been at the forefront of passwordless and you've seen enterprises start with one application, move to the other. So, if we can find, your final thoughts on this journey of passwordless, right? What does that journey look like?
That's a really excellent question. So most enterprises are quite complex, and they don't have pristine, ideal environment. They may have, need for logging into the web application, logging into the desktops. You may have, managed devices, unmanaged devices. they have a need, like most of them may have need to do login to Wi-Fi, right?
Mhm.
Network login. Many of, like, subset of the users may have need, if they're developers, then they need to do secure shell. They need, to secure the Git commits they are making. That needs password replacement. You may have RDP server, and you may have some old application which are not even supporting modern authentication. So that's why it becomes a journey. Typically, I would say that most enterprises starts with replacing the password while logging into the SaaS application or web applications, because
Okay.
those tend to support modern authentication. They are connected to the existing SSO. So if you tackle that first, you have taken care of quite a bit of uses for the password. So that's, in my mind, is the first logical step, followed by, if you have domain joined devices, you want to make sure that even those are not requiring to use password. So you could eliminate password for logging into the desktop itself. Of course, you are replacing that with more secure authentication using certificate-based authentication and biometrics for every step of the way.
Mhm.
Um, I would say that Wi-Fi login or network login in general is neck and neck. Many times
Yes.
you're able to handle that along with desktop login um, in parallel as well,
Yes.
or the order there may not like matter. It's a preference for enterprise. And then customers are moving for more use case you alluded to early on, where making sure that a specific commit is done by a specific user in the company. So git commit verification using the passwordless, logging into the any server using secure shell, but again doing that passwordless. RDP is another one. And the last one in this journey, maybe if you have applications, which you may be hard pressed to find many applications in 2022 which are not supporting modern authentication, but then tackling those applications which don't have modern auth, and maybe making them SAML capable, so that then you are able to connect to your SSO or beyond identity. So that's the journey enterprise takes.
And we're seeing this, Ashwin, this web SSO login. You can be an organization of any size. If you are a Microsoft house, for instance, that journey is already, happening, whether you want it or not, in terms of you can have applications that are in your private applications behind, your existing legacy SSO within the realms of the enterprise. However, if you are a Microsoft shop in a 150 employee company, then Office 365 is behind Azure AD. So you have to, that's now a web SSO or a web application that you have to go through Azure AD to. So this migration to the cloud is slowly happening. We were on-prem, now I think 2022 is a year where we're going to be hybrid. And obviously, we have also run into scenarios where a lot of customers are cloud only. Like, our organization, for instance, a high-tech startup, is a cloud only organization. We don't have anything on-prem per se.
That's correct.
So I think this is fairly exciting times, for us to be in this IAM space. But Ashwin, to begin with, I think this purpose of this broadcast was to start off with the fundamentals, and I think we covered a lot of ground, as you can imagine, right? And we're going to continue down this path. We're going to continue to take this journey, week after week, where we'll pick up any of these topics and we'll start talking about it, and we might even start doing some demos as part of this. And if you're watching this, and if this is a content that is of interest to you, if there's something that else that you'd like for us to talk about, we'd love to hear in the comments. Make sure you're civil. I hope they are. This was a very non-controversial podcast to begin with. But thank you very much, Ashwin, for that insight. I think this is interesting. I'm very excited about taking this journey to passwordless with you. And, until next time, thank you, everybody, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you.